This video today is meant to review the adjective work that you have done in Cambridge Latin Course Unit 2 in order to help inform future studies like with adverbs. A quick review of grammatical terminology: adjectives are used to describe nouns. In Latin, we consider adjectives that have 3 degrees. The first degree is called a positive degree. That's just the dictionary entry. Whatever you happen to find as the meaning of an adjective, that's exactly what a positive adjective is. So we have fortis, which means brave, obesus, which means fat, dulcis, which means sweet, verus, true, and tardus, which means slow. Now, one thing to note here is that there are 2 different types of adjectives in Latin, and those types of adjectives have to do with what family of endings they're allowed to use. So fortis is is a third declension adjective, which means it only have endings from the third declension. It can describe a noun from any declension, but it itself will only have endings from the third declension. You can recognize because is, are third declension endings. On the other hand, we have adjectives like obesus and obesus has endings from the first and second declension. First and second declension adjectives will only have endings from the first and second declension. They can describe nouns from any declension, but they are limited to their specific format. It's important to note that each of these positive degree adjectives, regardless of what type of endings they all have endings that are suitable for masculine, feminine, and neuter. Adjectives are presented in the dictionary by a masculine first, then a feminine form, and then a neuter form. We see the same thing here with obesus aum. First it's the masculine form, then it's the feminine form, and then we have the neuter form here. Because adjectives represent nouns from all 3 genders, so you have to be able to have some sort of fluidity with the endings. Okay, we also have comparative adjectives. Comparative adjectives look like this in English. They enable you to create a comparison between 2 different nouns. Quintus just said in the story In Termes Part 2, these baths are bigger than the Pompeian baths. In stage 22, we saw Latro talking to his daughters, accusing them, saying, "You are more talkative than parrots." You yourself might exhibit a comparative degree adjective in the sentence, "The forward on our soccer team is rather strong." You also saw Strithio talking to his mate Modestus, and Strithio said, "For you are stronger than Mars himself." Essentially, we have 3 ways to render the comparative degree in English. The first one is just to add er to the end of the adjective, and it makes it more than. We can also use the word more with the regular definition of the adjective. And finally, we don't use it very often, but it is a possibility to use the word rather, to use it as the comparative degree. In Latin, the thing I want you to remember about comparative degree adjectives is that Eeyore, from Disney's classic Winnie the Pooh, Eeyore is always more sad than any of the other characters. In any situation, Eeyore is more sad. This is going to help you when you look at comparative degree adjective forms. Creating comparative forms means taking the stem of your adjective and adding 3 letters, I-O-R. And those 3 letters, when you pronounce them, they sound like Eeyore. So that's why it's important to remember that Eeyore is more sad, because when you remember the donkey of Eeyore, you'll remember that anytime you see Eeyore as part of an adjective, that makes it comparative. That makes it bigger or better or faster or more or rather. So the example here of clarus aum, which means bright or famous, brighter, more clear, rather famous. Any one of those translations will do for the comparative degree. You might also see comparative forms that look like this: fortior, fortioris, fortiori, libentior, libentioris. No matter how you slice it, anytime you see those three little letters, ior, you know that you're dealing with something that is more than something else. You'll note that comparative degree adjectives take endings from the third declension exclusively. These are some sentences with comparative adjectives in context. So in the first one, gladiator bestias ferociores agitabat. Ferociores is the comparative from ferox, which means fierce. So you might say the gladiator was urging on the rather fierce beasts. Number 2, dominus amico fedeliori denarios tradidit. The master handed over money to his rather faithful friend. Number 3, our comparative degree is graviorem. Brigands did not want to carry the rather heavy jug. Number 4, mercator stultior. There's your comparative, amisit pecuniam. The rather stupid merchant lost his money. And number 5, laetior, describes the miles. The rather happy soldier gave a kiss to Vilbia. And now we have superlative adjectives. Superlative adjectives, I always encourage students to think of it as the most adjective ever. So we want to make sure that when we translate it, it is the most, it is the highest degree of whatever that adjective has to offer. Google Classroom is the most useful app on my phone. The very quick rabbit jumped away before I got out of the car. In English, you might not be used to seeing the word very and associating it as the highest degree possible. And yet, for our translation purposes, you should know that it is. To say that something is the most useful is the same in English as saying it's very useful. There is amazing diversity in the deepest reefs of the ocean. My friend is the luckiest girl in the world. Our dogs are very gentle. So we have 3 different ways of doing superlatives. This is the first one, to say most. We also have very. And then we also can attach the suffix est to make it superlative in English. Superlative forms, again, start with that stem that we used earlier, and we add issimos. So there's a direct link here between the number of letters that you have. The most amount of letters equals the superlative degree, which is the most. Hopefully that'll help you to remember that when you see something that's an adjective, but you see a lot of extra letters at the end, that's actually the superlative degree. It has very many letters. There are a couple of exceptions to the issimos rule, and it really just has to do with the stem of the original adjective. So in this adjective that has an R at the end, we're going to duplicate that R and it becomes erimus. We've seen pulcherimus, acerimus, miserimus, stuff like that. A handful of adjectives that end in L, not many of which we've seen so far, have the L that gets duplicated. However, you should note that even though these are sort of exceptions, you still have a multitude of letters that would equal est. So facilimus, easiest, similimus would be the most easy, etc. So again, the most letters equals the most degree. And then some superlative adjectives in context for you. Fortissimus, which would be strongest. Audacissimus, which is boldest. Molestissimus, most troublesome. Infelikissimus, most unlucky. Finally, there are some irregulars that I'd like for you to note in your notebook so that you know that they don't pertain.